I stood at the front door of my parents' house in San Diego, clutching the strap of my laptop bag like a lifeline. The December air was mild, but my hands felt ice cold. Behind that door, the annual Mitchell family Christmas party was in full swing, a celebration I hadn't attended in 3 years. The porch light cast shadows on the welcome mat, the same one that had been there since I was a teenager, now frayed at the edges like my relationship with everyone inside. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my blazer, a sharp contrast to the thrift store sweaters that used to fill my closet. The sound of laughter filtered through the windows, my brother Ethan's voice rising above the rest, commanding attention as always. Some things never change. My cousin Olivia's words from last week echoed in my mind. Your parents want to see you. Simple words that carried the weight of decades of unspoken pain. I wasn't the same Rachel who used to shrink into corners during family gatherings, disappearing behind her coding books while Ethan held court. No, I was now a successful back-end developer at a top cybersecurity firm in New York, with a brownstone in Fort Greene to prove it. Yet standing here, I felt those old familiar tendrils of invisibility trying to wrap around me again. The door opened before I could knock, spilling warm light onto the porch. Aunt Sarah stood there, her eyebrows rising slightly at my appearance. "Rachel, we weren't sure you'd actually come." Her tone carried that familiar mix of surprise and dismissal that I'd grown up with. Behind her, I could see the living room that used to be my bedroom, now furnished with the family's oversized sofa, as if my existence there had been easily erased. I stepped inside, the scent of Mom's traditional holiday roast, mixing with the sharp pine of the Christmas tree. Conversations stuttered to a halt as heads turned. Uncle Robert's face split into that patronizing smile I knew too well. Well, if it isn't our little computer whiz, still playing around with those machines. My fingers tightened around my bag. Inside was the laptop I'd used to save a multi-million-dollar contract just last month, leading a team through the night to rewrite an entire security framework. But they didn't know that Rachel, the one who commanded boardrooms and gave speeches at tech conferences, they only knew the shadow they'd created. Ethan emerged from the crowd, his charm turned up to full wattage. "Sis, you finally decided to grace us with your presence." He moved in for a hug, but I noticed something different in his eyes, a flicker of anxiety beneath the practiced confidence. Mom and Dad hung back, watching, their faces a complex map of emotions I couldn't quite decode. I straightened my shoulders and met their gazes steadily. I hadn't come seeking validation. Those days were long gone. I'd come to close a chapter, to stand in my truth. The silence in the room grew thick with unspoken words, but for once, I wasn't drowning in it. This time, I was its author. The holiday dinner stretched before me like a minefield of memories. Every bite of Mom's roast beef tasted like the countless meals where I'd sat quietly, watching Ethan monopolize our parents' attention with his latest football victory or debate team triumph. I was 16 again, pushing peas around my plate while everyone cooed over his early acceptance to Stanford. "Rachel, honey, you've barely touched your food," Mom said, her voice carrying that familiar note of criticism wrapped in concern. I looked up from my plate to find the entire table watching me. Even now, their attention felt foreign, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's clothes. I could trace the pattern of my invisibility back to middle school. While Ethan's room gradually filled with trophies and medals, mine housed a collection of used programming books bought with babysitting money. My first computer wasn't a gift. I assembled it piece by piece from components salvaged from the school's computer club recycling drive. Every night, I'd stay up late, teaching myself to code by the glow of that ancient monitor, the soft click of keys becoming my lullaby. "Tell everyone about your new startup idea, Ethan," Dad prompted, his face lighting up with that special pride reserved only for his son. I watched as my brother launched into his pitch, noting how his confident gesture couldn't quite hide the slight tremor in his hands. My mind drifted to Mr. Anderson and the high school computer club, the first place I ever felt seen. I could still picture that life-changing afternoon during the state hackathon. While other teams panicked over a critical system bug, I spotted the vulnerability in the code. 3 hours of intense focus later, I'd not only fixed the bug, but improved the entire security protocol. "Rachel has something special," Mr. Anderson had said, his voice firm with conviction. "Don't let anyone diminish that." Those words became my anchor through years of family gatherings where my achievements were met with polite confusion. "Still messing with computers?" they'd ask, as if I was playing with toys while Ethan was building empires. They never knew about the nights I spent working as a waitress in Boston, serving plates of pasta to pay for my computer science degree. They didn't see me hunched over my laptop until dawn, debugging code while my roommates slept. The distinction of graduating with honors was reduced to a brief mention at Thanksgiving, sandwiched between Ethan's latest venture and cousin Amy's engagement. "What exactly do you do now, Rachel?" Uncle Robert's voice cut through my memories. "Something with computers, right?" He chuckled, sharing a knowing look with Dad. The same look they'd given me when I turned down a local community college to pursue my dreams in Boston. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the weight of my house keys in my blazer pocket. Keys to the brownstone I'd bought with my own bonus, earned by saving that multi-million-dollar project. "I'm a back-end developer specializing in cybersecurity," I replied, my voice steady. "I design the systems that protect major financial institutions from cyber attacks." The silence that followed was different from the usual dismissive kind. I caught a flicker of something in Mom's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps recognition. For the first time, my words seemed to land with actual weight. But then Ethan cleared his throat, launching into another story about his startup's potential, and the moment evaporated like morning dew. Yet this time, I didn't disappear into the background. I sat straight-backed in my chair, a successful woman who had built herself from the ground up. Let them look past me if they wanted. I no longer needed their validation to know my worth. The evening shifted into gift-giving time, that annual ritual of forced smiles and measured expectations. I watched as Aunt Sarah distributed envelopes to each family member, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. When she reached me, she hesitated, then moved past without making eye contact. The empty space in front of me spoke volumes. I wasn't surprised. Disappointment requires expectation, and I'd learned long ago not to expect anything here. Still, the deliberate exclusion stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. Through the years, I'd gotten used to the small betrayals. The college graduation party that became a celebration of Ethan's new job offer. The promotion I mentioned that was dismissed with, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before everyone turned their attention to my brother's latest achievement. But something was different tonight. I could feel it in the air, see it in the way people huddled in corners, speaking in hushed tones. Ethan, usually the center of attention, seemed to be vibrating with nervous energy. He kept checking his phone, his trademark smile slipping when he thought no one was watching. "Everyone," he announced, standing up with an envelope in his hand. "I have an exciting opportunity to share." The room leaned in, like flowers turning toward the sun. I noticed Mom's hands twisting in her lap, a telltale sign of anxiety I remembered from childhood. My new startup is going to revolutionize the tech industry. We're on the cusp of something huge, and I want to offer my family the chance to be part of it. I felt my professional instincts kick in. After years in the industry, I could smell a desperate pitch from miles away. The way he emphasized family, the slight tremor in his voice, these weren't the markers of opportunity, but of desperation. "We're looking for initial investors," Ethan continued, his charm dialed up to maximum. $200,000. With the family's support, we could—" "I'm in," Dad interrupted, not even letting Ethan finish. Mom nodded eagerly beside him, though her hands hadn't stopped twisting. Uncle Robert was already reaching for his checkbook. The scene unfolded like a well-rehearsed play, everyone falling into their assigned roles. Olivia caught my eye from across the room. She'd always been different from the others, more observant, less caught up in the family's dynamics. She gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret, then slipped out onto the back porch. After a moment, I followed. The cool night air was a relief after the stuffiness inside. Olivia was leaning against the railing, staring out into the darkness. "You see it, don't you?" she asked without turning around. "The cracks in his perfect facade." "What's really going on, Olivia?" She turned to face me, her expression torn between loyalty and truth. "He's drowning, Rachel. The last startup failed spectacularly. This new one? It's not real. It's a desperate attempt to cover his debts. But they're all so invested in the image of Golden Boy Ethan that they can't, or won't, see it." The pieces clicked into place. The trembling hands, the forced smiles, the urgent need for family investment. A bitter laugh escaped me. "And let me guess, they're going to drain their retirement funds to save him?" "They already have," Olivia whispered. "Your empty envelope wasn't an oversight. They need every penny for Ethan's investment opportunity." She made air quotes with her fingers, her face twisted with disgust. "They still think you're the risky one with your computer job." The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. I stood there, absorbing the weight of this revelation. All these years, I'd thought their dismissal of my achievements was about not understanding them. Now I realized it was something deeper. They'd never allowed themselves to see me, clearly because doing so would mean questioning everything they believed about Ethan, about themselves, about the story they'd been telling for decades. Back in the living room, I watched the scene unfold with new eyes. It was like debugging. Complex code. Once you spot the pattern, you can't unsee it. Ethan worked the room with practiced charm, but I noticed how he avoided specifics about his startup. No mention of revenue models, user acquisition costs, or market analysis. Just vague promises wrapped in familiar family phrases. "We Mitchells always succeed, and family is everything." I thought about the night I'd saved that bank contract. While my team panicked about the failing security framework, I'd remained calm, methodically identifying the root cause. The solution wasn't in dramatic gestures or rushed decisions, but in careful analysis and strategic thinking. Now, watching, my family rushed to throw their savings into Ethan's scheme. I felt that same analytical clarity settling over me. "Rachel," Mom called, patting the space next to her on the sofa. My old bed space, I noted with irony. "Come sit with us. Ethan's explaining his vision for the company." I took the seat, maintaining a composed expression as my brother launched into another round of buzzwords. "AI-driven blockchain solutions," he said, though I doubted he could explain either technology. "Revolutionary user interface. Disruptive market strategy." Each phrase was a red flag, but the family nodded along, enchanted. "What's your tech stack?" I asked quietly, cutting through his monologue. The room fell silent. Ethan's smile flickered for a moment. "Oh, you know, all the latest technologies," he deflected, waving his hand dismissively. "But let's not bore everyone with technical details." In that moment, I saw it all so clearly. Years of being diminished hadn't made me smaller. It had taught me to observe, to analyze, to understand systems both digital and human. While they'd been focused on Ethan's spotlight, I'd been building something real, something solid, in the shadows. My phone buzzed with a notification. A junior developer back in New York needed approval for a security patch. As I quickly reviewed the code and sent my response, I caught Mom watching me with an odd expression. Something between curiosity and confusion, as if seeing a glimpse of a person she didn't quite recognize. "Everything okay at work, dear?" she asked, her tone suggesting that whatever it was couldn't be as important as Ethan's presentation. "Just approved a security update that will protect millions of banking transactions," I replied calmly, tucking my phone away. The statement hung in the air, its weight contrasting sharply with the empty promises filling the room. Uncle Robert chuckled nervously. Well, that's nice. But let's get back to Ethan's exciting news. I didn't argue. Instead, I sat back and began to plan. Not a confrontation. I'd learned long ago that direct challenges only made them dig in deeper. No, what was needed here was something more strategic. Like debugging a system, sometimes the solution isn't in forcing a new path, but in letting the existing one reveal its own flaws. I thought about my brownstone in Brooklyn, bought with money I'd earned by actually understanding technology, not just talking about it. About the team that respected my expertise, the clients who trusted my judgment, the industry that recognized my contributions. I had built a life that was real, solid, and true, while Ethan had built a house of cards that was about to collapse. As I watched him collect checks and promises from our family members, I made a decision. I wouldn't try to stop them. They wouldn't listen anyway. But I would be there, steady and prepared, when reality finally broke through their carefully maintained illusions. Sometimes the most powerful code is the one that simply monitors the system, waiting for the inevitable crash, ready to implement the recovery protocol. I caught Olivia's eye across the room and gave her a slight nod. She relaxed slightly, understanding, passing between us. She had done her part by telling me the truth. Now it was time for me to do mine. Not by fighting their narrative, but by standing firmly in my own truth, letting my reality speak for itself. After the investment pledges were collected, the family gathering shifted into that peculiar time when coffee is served and guards begin to lower. I sat at the kitchen counter, watching Mom fuss with the coffee maker, the same one I'd fixed countless times during high school, though she'd always credited Ethan with keeping things running. My laptop was open beside me, its screen displaying a complex security dashboard. I wasn't actually working. I was running a subtle experiment. 3 times now, different family members had glanced at the screen, their eyes skimming over the intricate data visualizations and real-time monitoring systems. Each time, their expressions shifted from dismissal to uncertainty. "Is that what you do all day?" Aunt Sarah asked, peering over my shoulder at a particularly elegant piece of code I'd written. Her voice carried a note of genuine curiosity that I'd never heard before. "Part of it," I replied, navigating through the interface with practiced ease. "This system helps prevent cyber attacks on major financial institutions. See these patterns? Their attempted breaches being blocked in real time." She leaned closer, her coffee forgotten. I could see her mental image of me, playing with computers crumbling as she watched millions of dollars in transactions flow securely through systems I'd helped build. "But Ethan's new company," she began, then hesitated. "He said something about blockchain." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Would you like me to explain how blockchain actually works? It might help you understand the investment opportunity better." The offer was deliberate. Not a challenge, but an open door. For a moment, I saw fear flash across her face. Fear of understanding, of having to question the comfortable narrative the family had built. She straightened up, clutching her coffee cup. "Oh, no, dear. It's all a bit technical for me. Ethan says we just need to trust in the vision." From the living room, I heard Ethan's voice rising with practiced enthusiasm as he continued to work. The room. But now I noticed something else. Mom hovering at the edges of his audience, her fingers worrying at her necklace, eyes darting occasionally toward the kitchen where I sat. I opened my email, deliberately visible on my screen. A message from the senator's office about the upcoming AI Ethics Commission meeting sat unopened in my inbox. Next to it, an invitation to keynote a major tech conference in Singapore. Small things, but seeds planted. "Rachel?" Mom's voice was hesitant as she approached. "Would you like some more coffee?" I turned to face her, remembering all the times I'd yearned for her attention. But now, I felt something different. Not the old hunger for validation, but a calm certainty in my own worth. "Actually, Mom, I'd love to show you something. I pulled up the presentation I'd given at the Soho meetup, the one that had gone viral in tech circles. This is what I do. Not just coding, but protecting people's livelihoods, their savings, their futures. My voice was gentle but firm. Would you like to understand it? She stood frozen for a moment, coffee pot suspended mid-pour. I saw the battle in her eyes, the desire to know her daughter warring with the fear of disrupting the family's carefully maintained equilibrium. Finally, she set down the pot and pulled up a stool. "Show me," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she really looked at me. For the next 20 minutes, I walked her through the basics of cybersecurity, translating complex concepts into simple terms. I watched understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by something else. Doubt. Not doubt in me, but in the stories she'd been telling herself for years. As I spoke, I noticed others drifting into the kitchen, drawn perhaps by the unfamiliar sight of Mom giving me her full attention. Even Uncle Robert lingered by the doorway, his usual dismissive smile replaced by a thoughtful frown as I explained how my team had prevented a major banking crisis. I wasn't just showing them my work. I was quietly dismantling their perception of me as the family's perpetual afterthought. Each line of code, each explained concept, was another crack in the foundation of their assumptions. And through it all, I maintained the same calm, confident demeanor I'd learned to project in boardrooms and conferences. The power wasn't in confrontation, but in simply being who I'd become, letting my reality speak louder than their long-held beliefs. The evening had reached that crucial point where truth hovers just beneath the surface of politeness, like a bug in seemingly perfect code. I closed my laptop, but its impact lingered in the kitchen. Mom was still sitting beside me, her coffee long cold, looking at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. The confidence I'd shown in explaining my work had shifted something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. That's when Ethan burst in, his charm now carrying a sharp edge of desperation. "Mom, Dad wants to discuss the transfer details for the investment." His eyes landed on my laptop, then darted away. "Family business," he added pointedly. I met his gaze steadily. "Cybersecurity is my business, Ethan, especially when it comes to financial transactions." The color drained from his face. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, revealing the panic beneath. He knew I could see through his vague technical jargon, could spot the holes in his startup pitch that everyone else had been too eager to ignore. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped, an unfamiliar harshness in his voice. "You weren't even supposed to be here tonight." "Actually," Olivia stepped in from the doorway, "I invited her because someone needed to see clearly." Mom looked between us, confusion clouding her features. "What do you mean? Ethan's startup is a wonderful opportunity. He's always had such good instincts for business. Has he?" I kept my voice gentle, thinking of the debugging principles I'd learned over years of coding. Sometimes the best way to find a system's flaw is to let it run until the error becomes undeniable. "Mom, when was the last time you actually saw any results from these good instincts?" The kitchen fell silent. In the living room, I could hear Dad going through paperwork with Uncle Robert, discussing liquidating investments. The sound made my stomach turn. "I've seen your bank statements," Olivia said quietly. "The ones you tried to hide, Ethan. This isn't about a new startup. This is about covering the losses from the last 3 failed ventures." Ethan's face contorted. "You had no right." "They have a right to know what they're investing in," I interrupted, still calm. "Just like my clients have a right to know their money is protected by real security systems, not empty buzzwords." "Oh, here we go," he laughed bitterly. "Perfect Rachel with her perfect job. You think you're so much better than everyone because you can write some computer code? I'm creating real opportunities here." "Are you?" I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Because I can show you what real opportunity looks like. The bonus I earned saving that banking contract? It wasn't just enough for a down payment on my brownstone. I could have covered your startup costs myself. His eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the brother I used to know. The one who'd sometimes sneak me extra dessert when no one was looking, before the weight of being the family's golden child had twisted him into this desperate man. Then, why don't you? Mom asked suddenly. If you have the money, he's your brother, Rachel. Family helps family. The moment crystallized around us. Here it was, the same old pattern, trying to reassert itself. The expectation that I should diminish myself to maintain their comfortable illusions. I stood up, straightened my blazer. I help by telling the truth, by refusing to enable lies that will ultimately hurt everyone in this room. I turned to Ethan. You're not a bad person, brother, but you're caught in a story that's destroying you and threatening to take our parents' retirement with it. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the kitchen window, I could see my reflection, steady, professional, unshakable. Behind me, Mom's reflection showed her looking between her children, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. I think, she said slowly, we need to talk about this as a family. All of us. No more secrets. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, then relaxed. Something shifted in his posture, like a program finally facing its critical error. I don't know how to tell Dad, he whispered. Then let me help, I offered, not unkindly. Not with money, but with truth. It's what I do every day. Find the real problem so we can actually solve it. The walk from the kitchen to the living room felt like traversing a decade of silence. Dad was still at his desk, checkbook open, retirement account statements, scattered across the surface like fallen leaves. Uncle Robert stood beside him, both of them looking up as our strange procession entered, me in the lead, followed by Mom, Ethan, and Olivia. I reached into my blazer pocket and felt the solid weight of my house keys, their presence grounding me. In my professional life, I'd learned that the moments before a system crash were crucial. You either contain the damage or watch it cascade. We need to stop this, I said clearly, my voice carrying the same authority I used in board meetings. Before anyone signs anything, we need to look at the real numbers. Dad's pen paused mid-signature. Rachel, I know you mean well, but you don't understand business the way. Actually, I do. I moved to the desk, gently but firmly moving the checkbook aside. Every day, I protect millions in transactions. I analyze patterns, identify threats, and prevent financial disasters. And right now, every pattern I see in this room is raising red flags. Ethan stepped forward, his charm fraying at the edges. Dad, don't listen to this. She's just jealous because what? I turned to face him, keeping my voice level. Because I built something real while you've been selling stories? Because I can actually explain how blockchain works instead of just using it as a buzzword? Or because I'm finally refusing to play the role you all assigned me? The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of years of dismissal, of diminishment, of being the family's comfortable shadow. But I wasn't that shadow anymore. Your last 3 startups, I continued, looking directly at Ethan. Want to tell them what really happened? Or should Olivia show them the statements she found? You don't know anything about, he started, but I held up my hand. Marketplace app. Burned through 200,000 in 6 months. No viable product. Social media platform. 300,000 down the drain. 0 user retention. Cryptocurrency venture. Nearly 500,000 gone. And now you want another 200,000 to revolutionize technology you don't even understand? Dad's face had gone pale. Ethan, is this true? I watched my brother's facade finally crack. He slumped into a chair, the weight of his failures visible in every line of his body. I needed one more chance, one more opportunity to be who you all thought I was. Who we forced you to be, Mom whispered, and I turned to see tears in her eyes. We did this. With our expectations, our blind faith, She looked at me. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. Our inability to see what was right in front of us. I pulled out my phone, opened my investment portfolio app. Here's what success actually looks like, I said, placing it on the desk. No schemes, no empty promises, just real work, real results, and real growth. I turned to Dad. The retirement funds you're about to sign away, they don't need to be rescued by a miracle startup. They need to be protected from one. Uncle Robert leaned forward, squinting at my phone's screen. I saw the moment the numbers registered. The value of my portfolio, the steady growth, the solid investments. Good Lord, he muttered. All this time while you were treating me like a child playing with computers, I finished for him. I was building something sustainable, something true. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my financial advisor. Top of her field, specializes in retirement portfolio recovery. I placed it on the desk next to the checkbook. Because that's what family really does. Offers real help, not comfortable lies. The silence that followed was different from any we'd shared before. It wasn't the silence of things unsaid, but of truth finally landing. I watched as Dad slowly tore up the check he'd been about to sign, as Mom sank into a chair beside Ethan, as years of carefully maintained illusions crumbled around us. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally, his voice small. I'm so sorry, Rachel, for everything. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the golden child or the failed entrepreneur, but simply a human being crushed under the weight of impossible expectations. I know, I said softly. Now let's talk about real solutions. The next hour unfolded like the careful recovery of a crashed system. We moved to the dining room, where I'd spent so many holidays in silence. Now, my voice filled the space as I laid out the reality of our family's financial situation on my laptop screen, translating complex numbers into clear truths. The good news, I explained, pointing to a spreadsheet I'd quickly created, is that we caught this in time. Dad's retirement fund isn't completely depleted yet. With proper management and some strategic restructuring, we can stabilize the situation. Mom sat beside me, not across the table as usual, but right next to me, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine as she leaned in to look at the numbers. Each time it happened, I felt a small shock of unfamiliarity. Physical closeness had never been our language. I still don't understand, Dad said, his voice heavy with confusion and something else. Shame, perhaps. How did you become so competent? We always thought... You thought Ethan was the successful one. I finished for him, keeping my tone neutral. Because success, to you, looked like grand gestures and big promises, while I was building something different, something quieter but more substantial. Ethan, who had been silent for a while, looked up from his hands. All those times I dismissed your computer stuff, you were actually protecting millions of dollars, weren't you? While I was just... He trailed off, the weight of his failed ventures visible in the slump of his shoulders. The difference, I said carefully, is that I never tried to be anything other than what I am. The pressure to be the family's golden child, Ethan. That wasn't fair to you either. Aunt Sarah, who had been hovering near the doorway, finally spoke up. But surely you must have been angry with us, Rachel. All those years we spent fawning over Ethan's ideas while ignoring your achievements. I thought about it, my fingers absently tracing the keys of my laptop. Anger wasn't productive, I replied finally. In my work, when a system fails, getting emotional doesn't fix the problem. You have to understand the root cause, then implement systematic changes. Like you're doing now, Olivia observed quietly. Mom reached out suddenly, her hand covering mine on the keyboard. "We failed you," she said, her voice breaking. "We failed both of you. Ethan with our impossible expectations, and you with our blind spots." I felt the old familiar urge to deflect, to make things easier for everyone else. But I'd learned that sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is hold space for uncomfortable truths. "Yes," I acknowledged, turning my hand to squeeze hers briefly. "You did, but that's not the end of the story." I pulled up another document, a simple family budget I'd drafted while they were processing the earlier revelations. Here's where we start fixing things. Not just the finances, but the patterns that got us here. "I don't deserve this. Help," Ethan muttered. But I shook my head. "This isn't about deserving. It's about doing what's right. You need to step away from the startup world for a while. Focus on rebuilding. Maybe consider using your actual talents instead of chasing Dad's dreams." Dad flinched at that, but didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "What talents?" It was the first time I could remember him questioning the narrative he'd built around his son. Progress, I thought, comes in small moments of clarity. "Ethan's always been good with people," I said. "Not just the surface charm, but real connection. Remember how he helped me deal with bullies in middle school? That's genuine emotional intelligence. There are legitimate careers built on that." I watched as Ethan straightened slightly, something like hope flickering across his face. It was a small change, but in my line of work, I'd learned that the smallest code adjustments could sometimes fix the largest system's failures. "We have a lot of work to do," I continued, looking around the table at my family's faces, all of them, for once, fully focused on what I was saying. "But we're going to do it right this time, with real numbers, real plans, and real communication." The evening light was fading outside, casting long shadows across the dining room table. But inside, something was brightening, not with the flashy brilliance of Ethan's old promises, but with the steady glow of truth finally acknowledged. As the evening deepened, the family gathering transformed into something I'd never experienced before, a genuine consultation. The dining room table, once a stage for Ethan's performances, had become a workspace. My laptop screen glowed with spreadsheets and recovery plans, while family members actually took notes on their phones. "The first step," I explained, "is understanding where we really are, not where we wish we were." I'd used these same words countless times with clients facing security breaches, but never thought I'd be saying them to my own family. Uncle Robert, who had spent years patting my head and calling my work cute computer stuff, now leaned forward intently. "Could you look at my investment portfolio too? After seeing what you've built?" He paused, embarrassment coloring his features. I realize I might need someone who actually understands modern finance. The irony might have been satisfying if it weren't so bittersweet. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice professional. "But first, we need to address the immediate crisis." My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan, my partner back in New York. "Everything okay?" he texted, knowing what this evening meant to me. I glanced up at my family, all of them waiting for my next words with an attention they'd never given me before. "It will be," I typed back quickly. Mom touched my arm hesitantly. "You seem so sure of everything. How do you do it?" I thought about all the critical systems I'd protected, the millions of dollars in transactions I'd secured, the teams I'd led through complex crises. In my work, certainty comes from competence, not confidence. There's a difference between knowing what you're doing and just believing you can do it. Ethan stirred at that, looking up from the budget plan I'd drafted. "That's what I never had, isn't it? Real competence. I was all confidence and promises. But you can learn. I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Success isn't about being naturally gifted or having the perfect pitch. It's about putting in the work, understanding the fundamentals, building something real. Dad cleared his throat. Could you teach us about how modern business actually works? The question seemed to cost him something. This man, who had always positioned himself as the family's business authority. I can do better than that, I replied, pulling up my contact list. I know people, actual experts in different fields, mentors, advisors, counselors. Because another thing I've learned is that real success isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about building the right network of support. Olivia, who had been quietly observing, smiled. You've built quite a network, haven't you? While we were all focused on Ethan's dramatic ventures, you were creating something much bigger. I nodded, thinking of my team in New York, the clients who trusted me, the speaking engagements and advisory roles. Life isn't about one big moment of triumph. It's about consistent growth, reliable results, and genuine expertise. I've been such a fool, Mom whispered, but I shook my head. You've been human. We all have our blind spots. In cybersecurity, we call them vulnerabilities. The key isn't never having them. It's recognizing and patching them when they're exposed. As if on cue, my laptop pinged with a calendar reminder. The AI Ethics Commission meeting next week. Several family members glanced at the notification, their eyes widening at the senior government officials copied on the email. Are you advising senators now? Aunt Sarah asked, her voice faint. Among other things, I replied simply. There's a lot about my life you never asked about. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was contemplative, filled with the sound of old assumptions crumbling and new understanding taking root. Tell us now, Dad said quietly. Tell us everything we should have asked about years ago. I looked around the table at my family, all of them waiting, really waiting, to hear what I had to say. It was a strange feeling, this shift from being the family's afterthought to its anchor. But maybe that's how real change happens. Not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet moments of genuine listening. Okay, I said, closing my laptop. Let's start with what I actually do, and then we can talk about how it might help us move forward together. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, its chimes marking how long we'd been talking, really talking, for the first time in years. My throat was slightly hoarse from explaining concepts I usually only discussed in professional settings, risk assessment, sustainable growth, digital transformation. But my family was still listening, their faces showing the gradual dawn of understanding. So that's why you bought property in Brooklyn instead of joining a startup, Mom mused, more to herself than to me. You weren't being risk-averse. You were being strategic, I finished. In tech, we call it having a robust architecture. You build on solid foundations, then scale up methodically. No shortcuts, no magical thinking. Ethan, who had been quietly making notes on his phone, looked up. All those times you tried to warn me about my startups, you weren't being negative. You actually understood what I was getting wrong. I thought about those conversations. My carefully worded suggestions met with dismissive laughs, my concerns brushed aside as feminine caution. I analyzed your business plans the same way I analyze security protocols, looking for vulnerabilities, testing assumptions, identifying single points of failure, and we ignored you, Dad said heavily, because we couldn't see past our own preconceptions. He gestured to the family photos on the wall, years of Ethan's graduation ceremonies, sports victories, startup launches. I noticed for the first time that my academic achievements were conspicuously absent. We'll need to take new photos, Mom said suddenly, following my gaze. Photos that show who you really are, Rachel. who you've become while we weren't looking. I pulled out my phone, found the picture from my last conference keynote. The image showed me at the podium, gesturing confidently to complex diagrams, the audience of tech leaders fully engaged. "This is who I am," I said, passing the phone around. "Not the quiet girl you thought needed saving, but someone who protects millions of dollars in assets and advises industry leaders." Uncle Robert studied the photo, then looked at me with new eyes. "You know, I always worried about you. Thought you were hiding in your computer work because you couldn't handle the real world. But this..." He shook his head, chuckling softly. "This is the real world, isn't it? The future." "It's the present," I corrected gently. "And yes, this is reality. Not the flashy promises of instant wealth that Ethan was chasing, but the solid growth that comes from actual expertise and hard work." Olivia, who had been typing on her laptop, turned the screen toward me. "I just looked up some of your publications and speaking engagements," she said. "Rachel, you're not just successful, you're a leader in your field." The room fell quiet as my family members took turns reading the screen, their expressions shifting from surprise to something deeper, respect tinged with regret. "All this time," Mom whispered, "we thought we were protecting you, trying to guide you toward what we thought was success. But you were the one who actually understood how the modern world works." I reached for my water glass, using the moment to gather my thoughts. "Success isn't always visible to those who are looking for it in the wrong places," I said finally. "You were all so focused on Ethan's traditional path, the charismatic leader, the big promises, the dramatic victories. You couldn't see that I was building something different but equally valuable." "More valuable," Ethan corrected, his voice firm despite its quietness. "What you built is real. What I was doing, it was all smoke and mirrors. I think I always knew that deep down. It's why I kept pushing for bigger deals, more dramatic promises, trying to outrun the truth." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something new in his expression. The beginning of genuine self-awareness. "You know," I said, "in technology, we have this concept called failing forward. It means learning from our mistakes, using them as stepping stones to better solutions. Maybe that's what this moment is for all of us." Dad reached across the table and took my hand, an unprecedented gesture that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Teach us," he said simply. "Not just about money and technology, but about how to be better, as a family." The moment hung there, heavy with possibility. Through the window, I could see stars emerging in the San Diego sky. The same stars I used to watch from my bedroom, dreaming of a future where I would finally be seen. Now that future had arrived, not in a blaze of vindication, but in this quiet moment of genuine connection. "Okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "Let's start with something basic but essential: how to really listen to each other." As midnight approached, the dining room had transformed into something that felt remarkably like my workspace in New York. Laptops open, papers spread out, family members focused on specific tasks. We weren't just talking about change anymore. We were implementing it, line by line, decision by decision. "I've set up a shared document," I explained, watching as everyone's phones pinged with the notification. "It's a 3-month action plan. In tech, we call this our roadmap. Clear objectives, defined milestones, accountability metrics." Mom, who had insisted on sitting next to me, peered at her phone with newfound determination. "Monthly family meetings," she read aloud. "Financial transparency reviews, professional development check-ins." Her voice caught slightly. "Family, therapy sessions. All optional," I added quickly, but Ethan shook his head. "No, we need this," he said firmly. "All of it, especially the therapy." He looked around the table, his usual charm replaced by something more valuable: honesty. We've been living in a fantasy world for too long. I've been living in a fantasy world. Dad, who had been quietly reviewing the financial recovery plan I'd drafted, looked up. Rachel, these investment reallocation suggestions, they're extremely detailed. You did this all tonight? I allowed myself a small smile. Dad, I do this kind of analysis every day, just with much larger systems. The principles are the same. Identify vulnerabilities, implement safeguards, monitor progress, adjust as needed. Just like debugging code, Olivia mused, and I turned to her in surprise. She shrugged. I've been reading up on what you do while we've been talking. It's fascinating how many parallels there are between software systems and human systems. That observation hung in the air for a moment, its truth resonating with everyone. We were, in our way, debugging decades of family dynamics. I've made some calls, I said, checking my messages. My financial advisor can meet with each of you next week, virtually, of course, and I have a friend who specializes in career counseling. I looked at Ethan. She has particular experience helping entrepreneurs find more sustainable paths. The old Ethan might have bristled at this suggestion. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. I need to learn how to build something real, he said, like you did. Speaking of building things, Uncle Robert interjected, I looked up that AI ethics commission you're part of, Rachel. The implications for business and society. Why didn't you ever tell us about this work? You never asked, I said simply. And when I tried to explain, you'd changed the subject to Ethan's latest venture. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. Mom reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. Well, we're asking now, Dad said. And I have to know, this commission work, is it something we can support somehow? Not with money, he added quickly, but maybe there are other ways we can... Actually, I said, there are. I pulled up another document on my laptop. I'm launching an initiative to bring coding education to underserved schools. The kind of program that changed my life when Mr. Anderson believed in me. It needs community ambassadors, mentors, organizational support. I watched as my family leaned in, their eyes bright with interest, genuine interest, not the polite dismissal I'd grown used to. We could help with that, Aunt Sarah said. I know people on the school board. I could handle community outreach, Ethan offered quietly. That's one thing I actually am good at, when I'm not trying to be something I'm not. One by one. They began to engage, offering genuine contributions rather than empty praise or dismissal. It was like watching a system come online properly for the first time, each component finding its true purpose, its real value. There's something else, I said, pulling up my calendar. Next month, I'm giving a keynote speech at a major tech conference. It's about building ethical, sustainable systems, both digital and human. I took a deep breath. I'd like you all to come. To watch you speak? Mom asked, her voice wavering. To watch me in my element, I corrected gently. To see the world I've built while you weren't looking. And maybe, I smiled, to finally take those family photos you mentioned, ones that show who we really are now. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the house. But unlike Cinderella's story, nothing was turning back into a pumpkin. Instead, something new was taking shape. A family structure built on truth, competence, and mutual respect. It's late, I said, looking at my family's tired but engaged faces. But we've made a good start. In programming, we call this a successful initial deployment. And tomorrow? Dad asked. Tomorrow we begin implementing the changes, one line of code at a time, one truth at a time, one step at a time. As we began packing up our laptops and organizing the scattered papers on the dining room table, a different kind of energy filled the room. It wasn't the artificial excitement that usually accompanied Ethan's pitches or the strained politeness of our typical family gatherings. Instead, there was a quiet purposefulness, like the hum of a well-tuned system. "I've shared the calendar invites for next week's virtual meetings," I said, watching as phones buzzed around the table. "Financial advisor on Tuesday, career counselor on Thursday, and the first family therapy session on Saturday, if everyone's still on board." "We are," Mom said firmly, surprising me with her decisiveness. She was already adding the appointments to her personal calendar, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a new addition that made her look somehow more real, more human. No more pretending everything's fine when it isn't. Ethan was studying the career counselor's preliminary questionnaire I'd shared. "What does genuine success mean to you?" he read aloud, then looked up with a wry smile. "You know, that's the first time I've ever actually asked myself that question. I was too busy trying to be what everyone expected." "It's a good question for all of us," Dad added, his voice thoughtful. He'd been quietly reviewing the financial recovery plan, making notes in the margins, not to challenge it, but to understand it better. "We all got caught up in appearances, didn't we?" I nodded, thinking of the countless family dinners where my real achievements had been brushed aside in favor of Ethan's latest grand plans. In tech, we have this saying, reality has a way of asserting itself. You can ignore system warnings for a while, but eventually, the system crashes, Olivia finished, showing she'd been paying attention earlier. But then you rebuild it better. Uncle Robert, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You know what impresses me most? Not just your success, Rachel. Though God knows that's remarkable enough. It's how you've handled all this. No gloating, no revenge. Just competence and compassion." I felt something warm and unexpected bloom in my chest. In cybersecurity, the goal isn't to prove you're right or someone else is wrong. It's to protect the system and make it stronger. That's all I'm trying to do here. Mom came over and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged me. Not the quick, perfunctory hug of family obligations, but a real embrace. "We have so much to learn from you," she whispered. As we finally prepared to leave, Dad handed me back my financial recovery plan, now filled with his careful annotations. "I have questions," he said. "Real questions, not challenges. Would you have time to discuss them tomorrow? Maybe over breakfast?" I looked at my father, this man who had always thought he needed to have all the answers, and saw something new in his eyes. The humility to learn, the courage to change. "Breakfast sounds perfect," I said. "After all, system updates work better with proper fuel." Later that night, as I prepared to head back to my hotel, my phone lit up with a message from Nathan in New York. "How did it go?" he asked. I sat in my rental car for a moment, trying to find the right words to describe the evening's transformation. "They finally saw me," I typed back. "Really saw me." Then, after a pause, "And maybe they're starting to see themselves clearly too." The response was immediate. "I told you the real Rachel Mitchell couldn't stay invisible forever. Want a video chat?" I glanced back at the house, where lights still burned in various rooms. Mom and Dad in the study, probably still processing the financial documents. Ethan in the kitchen with Olivia, their heads bent over the career counseling materials. Through the windows, they looked like different people than they had been just hours ago. "Actually," I replied to Nathan, "I think I'll stay a bit longer. There's more work to be done here." I got out of the car and walked back to the house, where Mom had already opened the door before I could knock. "I thought you might come back," she said softly. I made fresh coffee. In the kitchen, Ethan looked up from his laptop. "Rachel, can you look at something? I'm reviewing my old startup pitches, trying to understand where I went wrong. It's not pretty." Understanding our failures is how we learn to succeed, I said, settling back at the table. In tech, we call it a post-mortem analysis. A what? Dad asked, wandering in with his reading glasses perched on his head. It's when we analyze what went wrong in a project, not to assign blame, but to learn and improve. I pulled out my laptop again. Here, let me show you an example from my early days when I almost crashed a major banking system. Their eyes widened at this admission of failure from their supposedly perfect daughter. But instead of disappointment, I saw genuine interest. They gathered around as I walked them through that near disaster and, more importantly, what I'd learned from it. You mean you actually tell people about your mistakes? Ethan asked, incredulous. In my world, hiding failures is the biggest failure of all. Real strength is in acknowledging them, learning from them, and using them to build better systems. Mom touched my shoulder gently. I wish we'd known this years ago. Maybe we wouldn't have put so much pressure on both of you to be perfect. We can't change the past, I said, opening a new document. But we can document our learnings and create better protocols for the future. That's what we're doing right now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an email from the senator's office about the AI Ethics Commission. Dad noticed the sender's name and, instead of dismissing it as he would have hours ago, asked thoughtfully, "How do you balance all these responsibilities? The commission, your company, the speaking engagements?" "With clear priorities, strong boundaries, and good support systems," I replied, thinking of my team in New York, of Nathan, of all the people who saw and valued the real me. Actually, that's another thing we need to work on as a family. Olivia, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You know what's amazing? How this is affecting all of us. I just texted my daughter about your coding education initiative. She's in high school, struggling to find her path. Maybe she needs to hear from someone who found success by being authentic instead of trying to fit expectations." I looked around at my family, still imperfect, still learning, but finally willing to grow. "That's the thing about real change," I said. "It never stays contained. It ripples outward, affecting everything it touches." The night was deep now, but none of us seemed ready to end this moment. We were no longer the Mitchells who lived in denial and false appearances. We were becoming something else. Something real. Something true. The sun was rising over San Diego when I finally left my parents' house, casting long shadows across the driveway where Ethan's expensive car now sat with a "for sale" sign in its window, his first real step toward change. My laptop bag felt lighter somehow, despite containing all the documents we'd created throughout the night. Financial plans, recovery strategies, family meeting schedules. "Text me when you land in New York," Mom said, standing in the doorway. Not the perfunctory request of previous visits, but a genuine desire to stay connected. She held a copy of my upcoming conference schedule in her hand, already marked with the dates she and Dad planned to attend. "I will," I promised. "And don't forget, financial advisor at 2, your time." "Already set my reminder," she replied, holding up her phone with a small smile. "I'm learning." Ethan emerged from the house, carrying a box of his old startup, presentations. "These are going in the recycling," he announced. "Time to stop living in fantasies." He set the box down and turned to me. "Thank you, sis. Not just for saving the family's finances, but for showing me there's a better way to live." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the golden child or the failed entrepreneur, but simply a human being ready to grow. You know what we say in tech? The most elegant solution is often the simplest one. Just be real. Dad appeared behind them, his reading glasses now permanently stationed on his nose instead of hidden in his pocket. "Rachel," he said, his voice carrying a new weight of understanding. "Before you go, I want you to know something." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What you've built, your career, your integrity, your whole approach to life. It's not just successful. It's admirable. I'm sorry it took us so long to see that. I felt something shift inside me, a final piece of code falling into place. You know what the most important thing is in my work? I asked them. It's not the technical skills or the prestigious projects. It's understanding that every system needs regular maintenance, honest evaluation, and room to evolve. Just like families do. Olivia came out with a fresh travel mug of coffee for me. The Mitchell Family System 2.0, she said with a knowing smile. Complete with debug protocols and error handling. And better communication interfaces, I added, accepting the coffee. As I got into my car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same as when I'd arrived, but everything else had changed. My phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. Did you manage to implement the changes? I thought about the night's transformations. Mom actually asking about my work, Dad taking notes instead of giving orders, Ethan choosing truth over appearance, the whole family beginning to build something real together. System upgrade successful, I texted back. Some bugs remain, but the core functionality is greatly improved. Looking back at the house one last time, I saw my family standing together in the morning light. Not posed and perfect as they once would have tried to be, but real and a little messy, and all the better for it. Mom was already on her tablet, probably reviewing the financial documents. Dad had his arm around her, his proud posture now tempered with humility. Ethan was hauling his box of old presentations to the recycling bin, his steps lighter without the weight of false expectations. I started the car, remembering Mr. Anderson's words from so long ago. You have something special. Don't let anyone diminish you. He had been right, but not just about me. Everyone has something special, something real and valuable if they're brave enough to let go of pretense and embrace their truth. As I pulled away, I smiled at the thought of the family photos we'd take at my next conference. Not the artificial poses of the past, but authentic captures of who we'd become. A family learning to value substance over show, truth over illusion, and real connection over comfortable lies. The future stretched before me like clean code, ready for new functions, new possibilities, new growth. And this time, we would build it together, line by line, truth by truth, moment by moment. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.